Hello there, you're watching All 24 News, Midnight News edition live from Algiers. Here are the headlines. In the Human Rights Council, Algeria calls the international community to fulfill its obligation towards the Sahrawi people. Palestine considers the Zionist entity the first violator of the UN Charter, and the Arab countries condemn the recent escalation. Also coming up, UN nuclear chief reports constructive talks in Tehran, and the capital accuses the West of politicizing the International Atomic Energy Agency. Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu makes rare visit to frontline troops, and the European Union renews its support for Kiev. Hello again and welcome to the program. First up in our news, the permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations office at Geneva and to international organizations in Switzerland, Ambassador Lazhar Swalem, called on Friday on the international community led by the UN to fulfill its commitments and assume its responsibilities towards the Sahrawi people by guaranteeing their inalienable rights to self-determination. Here's Zahra Farjani with more.
Algeria continuously supports the Sahrawi just cause. Hence, its latest call for decolonizing Western Sahara was during a speech to the 52nd session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, where the permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations office in Geneva and to international organizations in Switzerland, Ambassador Lazhar Swalem, called on the international community with its various components to fulfill its obligation towards the Sahrawi people by guaranteeing their inalienable rights to self-determination.
Algeria reaffirms the importance of the resolutions previously issued by the UN Security Council and the International Court of Justice, and many other jurisprudences and advisory revisions regarding the occupied territory of Western Sahara by Morocco, all of which considered that the conflict is an issue of decolonization that should be resolved only by activating the principle of self-determination. In this regard, we call on the international community, the Council, and the High Commissioner to respect and implement their international obligations and assume their responsibilities towards the people of Western Sahara under occupation, guaranteeing their inalienable and imprescriptible rights to self-determination.
The Algerian diplomat also urged the Human Rights Council, the commissions, and other bodies of the United Nations system to monitor the human rights situation and record the violations against the Sahrawi people in the occupied territories, especially since the violation of the ceasefire agreement by the Moroccan occupation state.
We call on the Council, its special procedures and the committees of the United Nations to monitor and document the human rights and violations to which the people of Western Sahara are subjected in the occupied territories.
The just cause of Western Sahara is the most protracted colonial issue in the history. However, it is gaining more international support within the United Nations bodies. Algeria, among other countries, advocate in favor of the just cause and call for an end of the struggle in the last colony of Africa.
Algeria welcomed the signing of the framework agreement among the Sudanese parties as a step reflecting the will to constructive negotiations in order to restore stability in the country. Algeria's permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva also called on the international community to respect the sovereignty of the Sudanese state.
Algeria appreciates Sudan's efforts and its commitment to cooperate with the mechanisms of the Human Rights Council, despite the major challenges it faces. We welcome the steps taken by the Republic of Sudan to restore the stability in the country by signing the political framework agreement, which reflects the will of the concerned parties to open horizons for constructive negotiations and enhance the stability of the country.
And in the same context, South African Deputy Foreign Minister Candace Mashigo Dlamini affirmed in her speech to the 52nd session of the UN Human Rights Council that her country will continue to support Palestinians in their struggle against the occupation and apartheid regime, and also expressed her support toward the Sahrawis who are still under occupation.
South Africa is concerned about the growing tendency to focus on new conflict to the detriment of the old conflicts. We remain steadfast in our belief that the Human Rights Council must seek to secure all the human rights of all people without any distinction. In this end, South Africa will continue to support the struggle of the Palestinians as they battle occupation and systematic apartheid, and the people of the Western Sahara who are also still living under occupation.
The permanent observer of Palestine to the UN and international organizations in Switzerland, Ambassador Ibrahim Qureshi, said that the Zionist entity is the first violator of the Charter of the United Nations. In his speech, Qureshi said the Zionist entity as occupying power continued to violate international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Arab states condemned the escalation of Zionist occupation extremist government's military actions in Palestinian cities. In her speech, Qatar delegate to the UN clarified before the Human Rights Council that the occupying power committed grave violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity and racial segregation against Palestinians in serious breach of international law.
Since the formation of the extremist Israeli government, the occupation authorities have sought to escalate their military aggression against Palestinian cities, committing grave violations, crimes against humanity, and apartheid. It continued to enact discriminatory laws and indiscriminate declarations to expand illegal colonial settlement in occupied Palestine in flagrant violation of international law and agreements. Since this year, Israel has killed 67 Palestinians, arrested at least 1,000 Palestinians, demolished 58 homes, and its settlers committed more than 330 terrorist attacks as part of a systematic policy to harm Palestinians.
Still with Palestine files, 6 European countries expressed their grave concern over indiscriminate violence by Zionist settlers against Palestinian civilians, including the destruction of homes and properties. Here's Salma Nasib with more.
Following the Zionist plan to build more than 7,000 settlement units across the occupied West Bank, in addition to legalizing settlement outposts, in a joint statement, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the UK said those responsible must face full accountability and legal prosecution. All unilateral actions that threaten peace and incitement to violence must cease.
We urge the Israeli government to reverse its recent decision to advance the construction of more than 7,000 settlement building units across the occupied West Bank and to legalize settlement outposts.
On the other hand, the Palestinian Secretary Hussein Sheikh from the Palestine Liberation Organization on his official Twitter account said that he welcomes the call of European countries and international reactions.
We welcome the international reactions to the statements of the Zionist Smotrich, and we demand that words be translated into actions through international protection for our people from the oppression of the occupiers and settlers, and the implementation of international legitimacy resolutions.
Earlier this week, the European Union's envoy to the Palestinians called for accountability and for perpetrators to be brought to justice after a recent riot by Zionists on Sunday, in which a 15-year-old Palestinian was killed and dozens of houses, shops, and cars were torched. The Zionist entity has been trying for more than 5 decades to change the demographic situation in Palestine in its favor, using all criminal means, ignoring all international resolutions, and violating all binding governance to stop its endeavors to usurp lands.
To a different story now. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is starting a tour on Sunday to the Middle East, where he will visit Jordan, Egypt, and the Zionist entity. Austin will hold discussions on nuclear program of Iran, which the U.S. President Joe Biden was seeking a diplomatic solution to. According to U.S. officials, his trip will also include Iraq, where U.S. combat troops officially withdrew at the end of 2021. The International Atomic Energy Agency chief said on Saturday that Tehran showed its readiness to assist IAEA investigation on uranium traces at the undeclared sites in Tehran. The uranium there had been enriched close to 84%, a very close threshold for weaponization. Here's Islam Sid with more.
Head of the IAEA Rafael Grossi was meeting with officials in Tehran as an effort to push Iran to cooperate with the UN watchdog investigation on uranium particles. It said that particles found reach almost 84% enrichment, a proportion that is close to nuclear weapons grade.
The atmosphere is an atmosphere of work, of honesty and cooperation, and I think this for me, it is the most important thing.
For his part, the chief of Iran's nuclear program, Mohammad Islami, said that his country was elevating uranium up to 60% fissile purity and did not mount 80%. He added that the ambiguity of the findings had been resolved.
In the same report by the IAEA inspectors that was mentioned was detection of particles enriched 84%, not enrichment up to 84%, after the inspection, with the criteria being volume product and the tanks where the final product is stored. It was clear that there has been enrichment above 60%, and therefore this ambiguity can't go bigger and the issue is somehow resolved.
According to a joint statement of the IAEA and Iran, Tehran has given high-level assurances that it is willing to cooperate with the agency to resolve the outstanding safeguards issues and to engage in follow-up technical discussions with the agency soon. Grossi hailed Tehran's move, which could allow the IAEA to implement further verification and monitoring activities.
What we have agreed is on a number of concrete actions like accesses that we are going to have to information and places. As you can imagine, this is something that we agree with Iran, and we are going to be reporting subsequently on our conclusions or our evaluations, if you want. But what we decided is that we are going to be having a number of technical meetings starting very, very soon.
In 2015, Iran has struck a nuclear deal with the world powers to limit its uranium stockpile and ask for lifting sanctions in return. But the deal lost its effect in 2018 after former U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew and imposed tougher sanctions against Tehran, which led to a stalemate between the two sides.
To a different story now, Morocco will reopen the door to external debt by borrowing $2.5 billion to confront the burdens of a growing economic crisis that directly affected the purchasing power of Moroccans and mortgaged all economic indicators of the kingdom. Morocco must pay interest and commissions on the public debt, which will reach more than $3 billion this year. To Libya now, where the head of the Libyan National Unity Government, Abdelhamid Dbeiba, said that any constitutional amendment must pass through a popular referendum, stressing in a speech during his participation in the second meeting of the prisoners of the February Revolution in the city of Misrata that the only solution to the current crisis is the existence of a consensual constitution between all parties.
This constitution should be put into referendum. This is the first condition for the constitutional basis to be laid. If you Libyans don't vote, this is going to be against you. Bear in mind that this is what the Western countries want for us, except for some parties that want to break us. After this, we can hold elections, and you choose your leader, and everyone should accept the results. The enemies are stalking you, and they want to destroy you. Before we suffered a great deal during the war, but now your future is in Libya today.
The European Union announced on Saturday the establishment of a humanitarian air bridge to Goma to support the people of Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo who are facing the March 23rd rebel movement. The European Commission said in a statement that the air bridge established will allow the delivery of humanitarian aid in the form of medical and food products, in addition to a series of other emergency items in cooperation with the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, and other partners in the humanitarian field. For his part, French President Emmanuel Macron warned of imposing sanctions against any party seeking to obstruct peace efforts in Congo, vowing during an official visit to the African country to lift the freeze on humanitarian aid amounting to 34 million euros for the regions in the east of the country affected by the fighting against the M23 rebel group.
Ceux qui feront obstacle à ce plan,
those who do not respect this plan, we will see on the ground, because in the context of mediation, there is an investigative mechanism run by Angola that makes it possible to determine who respects this plan or not. Those who do not will face penalties. Over the past days, we have listened to Congolese and international humanitarian actors calling for help to address the lack of means and the harsh conditions faced by the Congolese. This is why France will be the first responder to the European Union's initiative to establish a humanitarian air bridge towards Goma. We will unfreeze an immediate contribution of 34 million euros in humanitarian aid.
All right, moving on now. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned on Saturday at a summit for the least developed countries taking place in Doha, Qatar, wealthy nations and energy companies for squeezing out poor countries with predatory interest rates and crippling fuel prices. According to Guterres, wealthy nations should contribute about $100 billion annually to aid the most impoverished countries that are trapped in vicious cycles in growing their economies.
And it is unacceptable if you are held back by processes and decisions that are made far beyond your borders. Indeed, our global financial system was designed by wealthy countries and largely to their benefit. That is why we are insisting so strongly, namely with the G20, for its reform.
To the Russia-Ukraine file now. Russia is advancing in Bakhmut and it's about to reach the triumph, while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky received the European Parliament President for a 3-day war crimes conference. Here's Sofian Kenturi with more updates.
For months, Bakhmut has been the scene of fierce fighting between Russian forces and Ukrainians. Moscow is advancing steadily toward the vital eastern stronghold. If Russian forces capture the city, it would give Moscow a symbolic triumph after months of fierce fighting and heavy casualties. As the battle rages on, local residents still living on the front line have shared their struggles amid frequent shelling.
There are problems with food. Humanitarian food is given to us only once a month. There is no electricity, no water, no gas.
Here in South Donetsk, the Russian Federation Minister of Defense General of the Army Sergei Shoigu inspected the Forward Command Post 1 of the formations of the Eastern Military Districts. Issues of providing troops with weapons, military equipment and ammunition, as well as issues of combat training of reserve units were discussed. Off the battlefield, the President of the European Parliament visited the western Ukrainian city of Lviv on Saturday, as a 3-day war crimes conference was being held there. Parliament President Roberta Metsola told journalists at the briefing that those responsible for war crimes committed in Ukraine need to pay.
We talk about peace, we need to talk about accountability. Whoever is responsible for these crimes needs to pay. And that means that if we find jurisdiction for the crime of aggression, then we need to find the legal means to do it.
For their part, US President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz held talks on Friday, focused largely on the war in Ukraine and the developments including the military aid that was delivered by the two allied nations. This comes as the United States sounds out close allies about the possibility of imposing sanctions on China if Beijing provides military support to Russia.
You help Ukraine meet its basic needs like food, health, heating, and you continue to give them input. And I want to thank you, Olaf, for your strong and steady leadership. I mean that sincerely. It's made a world of difference.
It's really important that we acted together, that we organized our lockstep, and that we made it feasible that we can give the necessary support to Ukraine during all this time.
With the escalation in tensions, especially in Bakhmut, which is considered as key region, both sides that are involved in the war are running to supply their troops to stand in the battlefield and to reach triumph.
More than 2,000 participants gathered in Beijing for the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, where they elected Zhao Leji and 10 other deputies as the Presidium's executive chairpersons. According to the conference spokesperson, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the meeting kicked off on Saturday will end on March the 11th. Also, the Congress will see Xi renamed as head of state and Li Keqiang replaced as premier. And with this, we end our program. For more, you can always visit our social media platforms. From me and the rest of the team, thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.